Good afternoon. Can I welcome you to the Emergency Committee of Wednesday, the 27th of May. Welcome to this meeting. In accordance with the 2020 coronavirus regulations, this meeting is being held virtually to facilitate attendance and enable the consideration of important matters during the current COVID-19 situation. The meeting will therefore operate differently in that members of the committee joining in remotely are still able to contribute and vote on any matter. I would ask that all attendees tuning in mute their mics unless they've been invited to speak by myself. If anyone wishes to speak, please send a message using your message icon on the taskbar indicating your wish to speak, and I will invite you to turn on your microphone at the appropriate point. When you're finished speaking, please remember to turn your microphone off again. Following questions on a debate, in order to make a decision on the item, I will ask the Chief Executive to do a roll call, asking committee members whether they are for, against, or wish to abstain from voting on any of the proposals. Please note that this meeting is being live streamed via the Council's website and will also be available to be viewed by members of the public and the press, who are allowed by law to film, audio record, take photographs, blog or tweet at this meeting. Before we start, can I ask all committee members present to introduce themselves in turn? I will start with myself. I am Councillor Yvonne Davis. I am the chair of the Emergency Committee. Councillor Ali.
Councillor Wasim Mali, vice chair of the Emergency Committee.
Councillor Crompton.
Councillor Maria Crompton, Deputy Leader.
Councillor Hadley.
Councillor Joanne Hadley, Cabinet Member for Homes.
Councillor Millard. Councillor Millard has told me that he is tied up currently, but he will hope to join as soon as possible. Councillor Shaheen.
Councillor Farid Shaheen, Cabinet Member for Living Healthy Lives.
Apologies for absence. I have received an apology from Councillor Moore. Can I, on behalf of the committee, wish him all the very best for a speedy recovery. I know his health is not too good currently. Can we confirm the minutes of the meeting held on the 6th of May as a correct record, please? Councillor Crompton?
Aye.
We don't have any additional items of business today, which we won't take after the declarations of interest. Can members have any interest to declare? No, thank you. Due to the conditional ill health of Councillor Moore, who's a scrutiny representative member on this committee, it is proposed to replace Councillor Moore to enable the scrutiny challenge to continue to take place at this critical time. I am moving that Councillor Rajbir Singh replace Councillor Moore on the Emergency Committee. Is anyone happy to second it?
Second.
Councillor Ali has seconded the motion. Can I ask members if they have any questions or issues that they would like to raise in connection with this? No, moving to the vote, I'll ask the Chief Executive to call on each member to indicate whether they are for, against, or wish to abstain on the recommendations. When the Chief Executive has called out your name, could you please say for, against, or abstain? Chief Executive.
Thank you. Councillor Davis.
For.
Councillor Crompton.
Sorry, you lost me there for a second. Can you just repeat what I'm saying for or against to, please?
The proposed change of the scrutiny representative member of this committee from Councillor Paul Moore to Councillor Rajbir Singh. If you could say for, against or abstain.
Thank you. I'm for.
Thank you. Councillor Ali.
For.
Councillor Hadley.
For.
Councillor Millard, have you joined us yet?
No.
No. Councillor Shaheen.
For.
Councillor Taylor.
She's not a member.
That's
it.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Everyone is in favour of the recommendation. Members, can you declare any interest in matters to be discussed? No, thank you. So agenda item number 5 is the COVID-19 reset and recovery planning. Firstly, I must again acknowledge the fantastic work of council staff in quickly and effectively responding to the needs of our communities during this coronavirus pandemic. Looking ahead, the world will look like a different place. We cannot overlook the massive impact that this situation has had on the people of Sandwell and the council itself, and will continue to have for some time. It is clear we will not be going back to business as usual. But we can use this opportunity to drive transformation for Sandwell. While we continue to support and provide to those who need it during lockdown, we are now looking ahead to how we can support all our communities to recover and what our organisation needs to look like to deliver that. Moving out of the response phase, things will need to change. We need to understand the impact on Sandwell as a place, on the people in that place, and on the council itself, so we can direct our efforts in the right areas. This report sets out the steps we will take as a council to reset ourselves and plan for the future. You will recall in March the council approved the corporate plan, Big Plans for a Great Place for the People of Sandwell, which is the council's plan to contribute to achieving Vision 2030. The strategic priorities set out in the corporate plan provide us the framework for developing our recovery plans. To make sure we take full advantage of the opportunities for transformation that reset and recover will offer us, we are establishing a set of working principles that will drive our thinking when planning for that recovery. These include embedding community wealth principles in our approach, exploiting the opportunities for a green recovery, continuing to provide services digitally wherever it is possible so that we free up resources to support those who cannot engage digitally, and empowering the workforce to continue to be flexible and resilient. The council cannot do this alone. We must engage, collaborate, co-produce with our communities, our key stakeholders and our partners, both locally, regionally, so that we can work together to achieve the ambitions of Vision 2030. We must acknowledge that the financial impact on the council and the borough will be significant for this year and many years to come. Not only will we have to manage the increased costs of responding to coronavirus and reduced income during it, but the impact on the economy will mean we will expect demand for some of our services to increase markedly in the years to come, whilst we have a depression within our economy, meaning our income is lowered. Hence, we will have to live within our means, and that means being really clear on our priorities and cutting our cloth accordingly. Our first priority of reset is to identify which services can safely restart or return to operate from council buildings. The safety of our staff and our users of services are paramount. We will only restart and return services once we have properly assessed the risks and put in place appropriate measures. For our longer term recovery, we will take a phased approach. We need to understand the impact on our local communities and on our economy and on the council's existing plans, finances, services and staff. We need to use that intelligence to identify our priorities for recovery, as well as opportunities for transformation and efficiencies. We need to develop the plans to deliver those priorities within the available resources and by working with key stakeholders, partners and communities. This is not a small task. It will take the rest of the year and longer. Life will not stand still during this time, and where we can move forward with activity, we will do so. We need to be, as a council, in the best position to drive the recovery of the borough as a whole. The current situation, as you are all aware, is constantly changing. Lockdown measures are now reducing, but we will see another peak with the virus. So we must continue to be flexible in our approach to scale up and scale down our response activity if needed. The last few months have been a shock to the system for all of us, for our communities and for the council. But with the approach set out in this report, I am confident that we can use this as a springboard for positive change. Sandwell will not only recover, it will be better, stronger and more resilient as a result of the challenges that we have all faced together than it ever was before. Can I invite Lisa McNally to update the committee on the trajectory within Sandwell, please?
Thank you, Leader. Hopefully you can hear me okay. I'll just give a very brief outline of the work that we've been doing as a public health department and then move straight into my report, which I'll share on the screen and scroll through it as we go, stopping at the main figures and graphs. So in a nutshell, public health work has recently been divided into 3 areas. Firstly, we've had to maintain and adapt public health services that can't stop because they are business critical. So I'm thinking, for example, of drug and alcohol services, health visiting, sexual health services, and of course our work on mental health. So we have worked hard to work with our service providers where we commission those services or where we provide ourselves, adapt what we do. And I'm happy to report that all those services still seem to be functioning well in an adapted way. We will obviously, as we move out of recovery, work to follow that trajectory out of lockdown as and when appropriate. The second piece of work I'm going to talk more about in my report is the Health Protection Cell. So the Health Protection Cell was newly established for the pandemic and is made up of myself, public health consultants and infection control specialists in my team. We operate a 7-day service and our job is to respond to outbreaks as and where they occur, as well as advise workplaces and most notably care homes over the last few weeks on managing their outbreaks. And the final piece of work is the analytics cell, which is actually produced and monitors the data that I'm going to show you. They provide daily feeds of analytics on what's happening in Sandwell and across the country, so we can get one step ahead in terms of our response to the pandemic. So I'm going to share my screen now, if that's okay, to the report. So hopefully you can see the first slide, the first document.
Yes, that's fine.
Thank you, Leda. So at the start of the report, I gave a brief introduction on national patterns. There are a number of patterns that I'd like to draw attention to because, of course, they affect Sandwell disproportionately. So first of all, we are now, since this report was written, we're now up to 40,000 deaths in the country from COVID-19 illness. Obviously, we know older people are affected more, but there are two other characteristics to consider. Firstly, people from Black and Asian minority ethnic groups are disproportionately affected in terms of the severity of COVID-19 illness and the number of deaths. So I've presented some figures there. In short, the headline figure is that some people in those groups, most notably Black men, for example, are 4 times more likely to have died from COVID-19. So there's a lot of work underway to understand why that is. A lot of it will be explained by socioeconomic factors, occupation groups, etc., but not all of it. So we are working very closely with the voluntary sector, community groups, to work with them, as of course other local authorities across the country are, to try and address that issue. The other factor I wanted to focus on with this graph is economic deprivation. COVID-19 has, maybe unsurprisingly to a lot of us, once again shined a light on the deep health inequalities that exist in the UK. And that graph you've got in front of you there compares each deprivation decile, so 1 to 10, with 1 being the most deprived. So as you go along to the right, you have more deprived, more economically deprived groups. And you can see how compared to decile 10, how much they compare. So what you've got there is a percentage, how much more proportionally they are than the most affluent groups. And you can see groups in decile 1 and decile 2, the most deprived groups, are well over 100% more affected in terms of deaths and cases.
Lisa, could I ask a question?
Yeah, sure, thanks.
Do we know what the population of Sandwell looks like overlaid with that?
We don't have detailed data. When somebody's death is registered, we don't get their sort of deprivation score with that. However, what we can do is look at deaths in the most deprived areas and compare them to the least deprived areas. Obviously, Sandwell has a lot of deprived areas, but we can provide that analysis. And what I can tell you is we do seem to be following the same pattern. So deprivation is a really strong indicator of risk in Sandwell, just as it is across the population.
Is Sandwell markedly different to the rest of the Black Country in terms of deprivation?
It is probably, I'd say, on most indices of deprivation, the most deprived, although certainly Wolverhampton and Walsall do come close. Dudley is more affluent, and indeed you'll see that leader reflected in the number of cases and deaths reported. So we have a similar number of cases and deaths as Wolverhampton and Walsall, but we have more than Dudley.
Okay, thank you, Lisa.
Dudley in turn is higher than the national average. Moving on to a bit of a look across time, and I do have an update for you since this report was produced. It just shows how fast moving this pandemic is. I wrote this report on Saturday and the data has already changed. So as you can see, over the course of the pandemic, moving from the left of the graph, which is the 1st of March, right through to the end of May, we managed to, we were hit hard.
Could I just ask, because all we can see is a green line, a red line and a blue line.
Yeah, I'll explain that. So
Okay.
the numbers, so what that graph shows is the number of new confirmed cases per 100,000 population each day. So that shows the curve, you know, we keep on talking about the curve of the pandemic. That green line is our curve, and the red and blue lines are the regional levels. So what we have, I'll just check, yes, the red line is the Midlands and the blue line is the England average. So as you can see, the curve for Sandwell went higher, but then returned back to national and regional levels towards the mid part of May. What I can tell you now, Leader, is the very latest data we've had in literally this morning shows, as you actually predicted in your opening remarks, another rise up in cases. Now, to some degree, that will be a function of the increased amount of testing we're doing. But the figures I saw this morning can't be completely explained by that. So I think your remarks that we will be seeing a second wave, which is what we have always expected, are actually coming true.
Well, if I could ask another question, I mean, I think it's absolutely clear that we have had the eye taken off the ball with people socially distancing because of some terrible examples that we've been given. But one of my questions was, where we've got the Midlands, does the Midlands skew the figures? Because if we were to be compared with the Black Country, what would that graph look like?
If the Black Country were on there, Wolverhampton and Walsall would be very close to us and Dudley would be slightly below.
Okay. Is it possible to do that in future slides so we can
No
see?
problem. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
And I do have some further graphs that do look at the Black Country. In fact, but yeah, so the key message from that graph, Leader, is that since the government relaxed social distancing rules, there is of course a time lag. So if you relax a social distancing rule, like you say, for example, people can go and sit in parks and sunbathe, as the government did a couple of weeks ago, it takes a week to 2 weeks for that to show up in infections. Yes. And another week to 2 weeks to show up in hospitalizations and deaths. Yes. That's because of the incubation period, then the clinicals. So unfortunately, and I think the government knew this, that they knew that relaxing these social distancing rules would lead to a second peak. Yes. And unfortunately, it's areas like Sandwell, Walsall, Wolverhampton that are going to be hit the hardest.
So we need to be emphasising the message that it is not yet safe and people need to look after their own health and make sure they're not mixing with people who don't live in their own homes.
Absolutely. The message I keep getting, I was, as you probably know, I was a bit disappointed when we moved away from the stay home message to the Yes. Stay alert message. But yes, the recommendation, absolutely spot on. We need to take a really strong line with our messaging and enforce social distancing as much as we possibly can.
Thank you.
Moving on to the next analysis. Now, this isn't over time, this is split by area. And this is split by the 4 areas in the Black Country, as well as the national average. And that really shows the picture I described earlier. So again, those are deaths per 100,000 population. We use that number obviously because that enables us to compare different sized areas. And you can see there the Sandwell, Walsall and Wolverhampton are, I think, on a bit of a course. Dudley is lower. Walsall has actually been leading the way so far across the pandemic. In terms of the, sorry, leading the way is probably the wrong phrase, isn't it? Being hit hardest by the pandemic so far, but you can see that comparison. Now, We can show you as much as we like, Leader, different numbers of cases, but as I said, confirmed cases to some extent are a distortion of the truth because they also rely on how much testing we're doing. And in Sandwell, we've done an enormous amount of testing, especially proactively in care homes. By the end of this month, for example, we should have every single care home having had a testing sweep throughout there with proactive swabbing. This graph is really the way which any area, any country in the world should be evaluating the effect of the pandemic. And it is all-cause mortality, because COVID-19 doesn't just cause deaths directly, it also causes deaths indirectly. So, for example, we know that people have not maybe sought medical advice for symptoms that we would normally want them to, because they've either not wanted to burden the health service or maybe they've been afraid of infection. Certainly there's national studies that have looked into that. So we've been on a campaign for some weeks now to say to people, please don't ignore other health issues, especially symptoms that may be around your heart, that might, or potential cancer symptoms or signs. Please do use the NHS. And what you can see there, I think, represents the true impact of COVID-19 on Sandwell. The blue blocks are the COVID-19 deaths. And along the bottom, we've plotted it week by week. On the left is the 6th of March, and it goes right up to the middle of May. This is based on ONS data, which, as you know, has a bit of a time lag to it. So you can see from March up to May, you can see the blue line went up and then fell back down again. But as did the orange line, which is the the blue line is all cases excluding COVID, and the orange line is the COVID cases. So you can see the curve in the orange line, which I showed you earlier, but underneath that is an extra increase in the blue, which is the non-COVID deaths. And you can see that red line is the 5-year average. So if you look at the middle there, weeks 14 to 15, right in the middle, which are the 2 or 3 highest, 14, 15, 16, you can see that not only have the COVID deaths taken us above the red average line, but also the non-COVID deaths. So this is the best way to establish the true costs of COVID-19 to any given area. And we'll keep providing information on that. Happily, you can see the deaths have reduced significantly. And in week 19, right on the right-hand side there, you can see that the orange block is 1/3 of the size that it was 3 or 4 weeks before. So COVID-19 deaths have come down. But again, we are anxious about that second wave. So moving on to a specific setting, and then this is my final section, which is really taken up me and my team's time over the last few weeks, is the care homes. Care homes are, in infection terms, the equivalent of a tinderbox. If you have one person who's infected with COVID-19 in a care home, it's very difficult for the staff to contain that. Add to that the fact that everyone in that care home is in the highest possible vulnerability group, if you like. So if they are infected, there's unfortunately a high chance that they'll become very ill or die. The first graph I'm showing you there goes from the mid-March to the mid-May, and you can see how the curve, this is deaths in care homes. So it rises from 0 up to a cumulative total of 34. But the next, so it got very bad. It was probably one of the toughest times, I would say, in my career over the last few weeks, trying to support the care homes, managing their outbreaks, and also dealing with, of course, the high emotions of the staff in the care homes. And then moving on, what you can see now is that that has finally come down. This is the number of deaths each day, a rolling average in the care homes. moving from mid-April right up to the current time. And you can see, whereas we got up to an average of 1 to 2 deaths every day in care homes, we're now down to more like 1 a week, which is still 1 a week too many from COVID-19, but it's a lot better than it was. We're still remaining very vigilant, and we still operate that 7-day support service into care homes. What we've also seen is that Sandwell seems, at least, to have had less deaths due to COVID-19 in care homes than the rest of the Black Country has, but there are lots of caveats around that data, so I don't want to start claiming that as a good news story just yet. We need to actually look into that further, but we do seem to have managed to get things under control for the moment. And finally, I'll just unshare my screen now because it's just text. Just to talk about, as we move forward, we have new outbreak plans in place. We're going to have to move, obviously, to not just cover care homes, but also schools and workplaces as more of them open up. We've scaled up as much as we possibly can. We're ready in Sandwell. Unfortunately, as you know, the central government have experienced some problems with their national test and trace system, which we absolutely need in place in order to bolster our local response. They say that we'll be ready by the 1st of June. However, I can tell you that I don't think it will be particularly effective on the 1st of June, and they'll still have teething problems. We'll work as best with that as we can, but what I can assure you is that everything that we need to have in place from a Sandwell perspective is in place and actually has been for a while now. So we're ready to face whatever is thrown at us. And I think that's it. I've probably gone on long enough, so I'll mute myself and pass back to you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Lisa. That was really informative. Do we have questions? No. No. I want to send the thanks for all of us, and I'm sure from all the people of Sandwell, for the brilliant work you and your team are doing, Lisa. And we're very aware that actually people are working 7 days a week, and I wanted to make a plea for you and the Chief Executive to ensure that you and your team are able to take respite, because it is important that this is now seen as a marathon. It is no longer a sprint. We need to be in this for the long term, and that means we need to look after everybody's well-being. But thank you so much for the hard work that you're putting in. Can I now move to ask Councillor Ali to provide the update on the financial impact of COVID-19, please?
Thank you, Leader. So this report sets out the funding allocations that have been allocated to local authorities for COVID-19. Ring-fence funding of just over £21.5 million has been allocated to the council and can be used to fund a range of financial pressures outlined in the report. However, further guidance is expected shortly, setting out exactly which financial pressures the Ministry of Housing, Communities and Local Government will fund, and the message of a shared burden suggests that it is likely that all of these will be covered. The latest version of the MHCLG return was submitted on the 15th of May 2020. This reported estimated financial pressures of just over £24 million, which is made up of just over £10.5 million additional expenditure and just short of £14 million loss of income, of which £6 million relates to business rates and council tax. This is based on the assumption specified by MHCLG, which is that the current circumstances continue for a period for a period of 4 months, i.e. until the end of July. This leaves a shortfall of just short of £3 million, which would need to be funded from the council reserves unless compensated savings are identified during the financial year or further emergency funding is allocated to the council. In summary, In addition to the 2.8 shortfall, the council faces further budget pressures of around 4.3 million, and the table below summarises the financial pressures outlined above, including the shortfall calculated from the MHCLG return. I'm not going to go into detail of the table. It is set out in the report and can be seen on there. The council's free balances at the end of 2018-2019 were 12.1 million, which is equivalent to 5% of the net expenditure budget, which is in line with the policy to hold balances between 3 to 5%. If these pressures are required to be funded from free balances, these would reduce to 4.972 million, which is equivalent to 2%, and is below the permanent level set out in the reserves policy. It would also limit the council's ability to deal with ongoing pressures that are likely to be a result from the expected economic downturn. No changes have currently been made to the Section 151 responsibilities of the Chief Finance Officer, nor the requirements of the Section 114 of the Local Government Finance Act 1988, which means that the council is still legally required to operate within the balanced budget, and if this is not possible, then remedial action would need to be taken in order to avoid the issue of a Section 114 notice. Thank you, Leader.
Thank you, Councillor Ali. Do we have any questions on the finances? No. I mean, I think it's important to say it is deeply, deeply worrying, our financial future, and we don't take it lightly. And I think it's important that the people of Sandwell understand that the council can only provide services if it has sufficient income.
Of course.
And if our income is reducing dramatically and our expenses are increasing dramatically, we will need to look at every single area of service.
Absolutely. To
see where we can make changes, where we can make savings, and where we can do things differently in the future. So I would want to reassure everybody that the finances are absolutely a high priority. We will be arguing with the government that they should more fairly share the funding that has been handed out to all areas, because Sandwell has not had the proportion of funding which equates to the proportion of COVID that it has had to deal with. And we would hope that the government will make more funding available in the future and not expect councils to eat into very low reserves.
Absolutely. And I've had conversations with cabinet colleagues from the other West Midlands councils, and it appears that Wolverhampton are very much empowered as West Sandwell is. So we agree to work together with the government to ensure that West Midlands councils are given their fair share and make sure that we're being looked after, essentially.
Good. Thank you. Can I now ask Sue Knowles to provide an update on business support grants and discretionary business grant fund policy, please?
Yes, thank you, Leader. So I'm Sue Knowles, Head of IT and Revenues and Benefits, and the report today is seeking two decisions. The first is to note the progress Sandwell has made in administering the original grant scheme for small businesses and businesses in the retail, hospitality and leisure industry. And the second decision is for the committee to approve a new discretionary business grants policy, which I'll come on to. So to update you on progress then, since the business support grant scheme was announced by the Department for Business, Energy and Industrial Strategies in March, Sandwell's been working really hard in the Revs and Bends service to administer these grants, and more importantly to encourage as many businesses as possible to apply for this crucial support. We initially estimated, using our business rights system, that around 5,887 businesses had potential entitlement to one of the grants. That was broken down into 4,897 eligible businesses for a small business grant of £10,000, 432 businesses with potential entitlement to a £10,000 retail, hospitality and leisure grant, and 558 businesses with potential entitlement to a £25,000 retail, hospitality and leisure grant. The issue with those figures is the majority of our eligible businesses were small businesses. Now that poses a number of issues in terms of administering these grants. The first is that small businesses don't have to pay business rates. So they will be listed on the business rate system, but they will get full relief for their business rates. So because they don't have to make payments, we haven't actually got bank account details for a large proportion of the businesses who had entitlement to these grants. The ones that we had, it was just 4%, and we quickly paid grants to those 236 businesses right at the beginning of April. At the same time as doing that, letters went to all 5,800 businesses, writing to them, informing them of the new grant scheme and advising them to make an application using an online form, which was actually available at the end of the first week in April. Those letters went first class, so businesses started to return the grants quite early in April. In addition to writing to all the businesses, we also publish the grant scheme through our website, social media, business improvement district administrators and our own business growth team to encourage as many businesses as possible to come forward. The grants themselves are actually processed manually, so there's no computer system that can handle this. It was something completely new, so it is a manual process to actually consider the application and make that payment. But one of the big issues Sandwell faced is that high proportion of small businesses. So not only do we not have bank account for these businesses, there's actually no legal responsibility for a business to report that they have moved in and are now in occupation of a business premises. So what tends to happen with small businesses is that they can frequently change hands, but they don't notify the business rates team because they don't have to pay business rates. In their mind, why do they need to tell us when they've got nothing to pay? So when you look at the demographics of Sandwell's businesses and our ability to pay these grants swiftly, we were up against it right from the start because of 83% of the businesses being small businesses. So at the end of April, around the 24th of April, we were at a point where only 40% of businesses had applied for the grants. So we quickly mobilised 3 teams using staff from our finance team, Revs and Bens, and also the business growth team to attempt to contact the 3,600 businesses that hadn't come forward to make a claim for the grant. Where we couldn't contact them by telephone, we emailed them, and since commencing that campaign, that proactive take-up campaign, we actually received an additional 2,183 grant applications. So that was a really positive thing for our businesses in Sandwell. That campaign has now concluded. We've done all the contact that we can for those businesses, and we've actually had no response at all from 777 businesses. Now that could well be because the premises is now empty and we haven't been notified, and 116 have actually come back and said they don't wish to claim a grant. So that really indicates that our original estimate was there's about 15% of businesses in that estimate that don't actually want to claim. So the current position is that we've had almost 5,000 applications for the grant. We've actually determined and paid 3,696 of those, and we had 1,300 outstanding applications. That is now less. It's only just under 1,000 outstanding applications now. So, and these are the ones that are actually in query. So there's a discrepancy in the information that have been provided, or we're actually awaiting information to come through from the business owner to give us some information that we need. So as at today, the report said that we've actually dealt with 68% of the applications. As at today, that is now 75% of the applications have now been dealt with. To process the grants as quickly as possible, we increased resources. It is actually, you do need technical knowledge of business rates to be able to do these, but some of our council tax officers have that, so we increased the team to get the payments out as quickly as possible. The other area of work as well that the same resource has needed to deal with, along with the grant scheme that was announced at the beginning of, at the middle of March, the BEIS also introduced some business rate reliefs, 100% relief. They called it a business rates holiday for a year. And that was for any business in the retail, hospitality or leisure industry, and also certain nurseries. So for Sandwell, that meant 1,188 businesses needed to be awarded 100% relief. And that again was a manual process, so we had to do each one manually. They were all done by the end of April, and all those businesses have had their new business rates bill confirming that there's nothing to pay. Just to confirm, the grants are funded by the government, so we do get 100% funding through a Section 31 grant for the grants that we actually pay. And then moving on to the second decision required, which is for the
Can I ask a question before you move on? If we get questions for the first bit, and then we'll move on to the second bit. So does anyone have questions about the business support grants or the rate relief? No. Again, I think it's important to say a very big thank you to the whole team, because I know that you have been unfairly castigated for being slow, and actually the performance comparison has been with the total volume of businesses who might benefit, and not with the volume of businesses that have applied. And had it more properly looked at the performance against those people who had asked for assistance, actually Sandwell was doing very well. And I am very pleased that when I feed through cases, the response is almost within a day. So I think you need to pass the thanks on to the team and say we absolutely understand why they were unfairly criticised, and we wanted to send our thanks and keep up the good work, because it is making a huge difference to our businesses, and we want all our businesses to survive. They are really, really important to the council. Any other comments from anyone else?
Just want to second what the leader said. Obviously, it wasn't fair that this was numbered on your kind of last minute thing and the government's expected to pick on it. It is a massive task, given the number of small businesses we've had. But again, just as the leader said, whenever we've had any cases, you know, we always get the feedback coming back from the residents and the business owners that it's been dealt with in a good way and it's been done. Obviously, there's issues, and there always is with this type of thing. We don't have bank details, and it's about letting the businesses know that, you know, in order to process it, we have to follow a strict process. And we're not just going to give money out for the sake of giving money out. We have to be very, very, you know, we have to monitor the process and have a strict guideline that we have to follow. And as long as that's okay, then we're happy to give out the money. So good, and well done.
But yeah, do send on the congratulations to the team. I know they have worked unbelievably hard, and I think they've been unfairly criticised, in fairness, Sue. So well done to you and the team. So do we want to move on to the second part now?
Okay, thanks, Leader, and thank you, Leader and Councillor Ali, for your comments. I know the team will really appreciate that, because it has been incredibly complicated to administer, largely because of the number of small businesses. And as you say, the league tables haven't really in any way reflected the work that authorities have done. It was just a very crude percentage of the amount of money paid from the allocation, which just doesn't reflect the work at all. So really appreciate your comments. Thank you. Okay, so the second recommendation then is for the committee to approve a new policy for Sandwell for discretionary business grants. So on the 1st of May, the Department for Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy introduced a new discretionary grant fund, and they wanted local authorities to commence making payments as near to the beginning of June as possible. But in order to achieve that, then we have to have a discretionary grant policy. So Appendix 2A of the papers actually shows you the policy that we have drafted for approval today. So the government quickly realised that the grant schemes that were announced for small business and retail, hospitality and leisure, whilst it helped a huge amount of businesses, there were quite a few small businesses that were falling through the net because of the eligibility criteria that had been set. So on the 1st of May, they actually launched a new discretionary business grant fund. And for Sandwell, that funding will be 3.362 million, and we can pay discretionary grants up to that amount. They have set some general criteria that businesses have to meet. It is still intended for small businesses, and they've defined that as either a small business or a micro business, and that is detailed in the policy and the conditions that have to be met. Now, the reason that they've gone back to that definition is because the grant, the new grant scheme no longer requires someone to be eligible, to be paying business rates or listed as the business rate payer. And that's because of the types of businesses that they realised had fell through the net. So the government wants us to prioritise requests from certain businesses. And the first is a small business in shared offices or other flexible working space, such as industrial parks, science parks, incubators, which don't have their own business rights assessment. And we've certainly had a number of requests from businesses who fall into that. So it could be that they just rent an office in a much larger business. The larger business is the business rights payer. That office isn't listed separately. Under the initial grant scheme, they couldn't get any help. Under this new discretionary grant scheme, we can consider them and make a decision as to whether we want to help. So the next is very similar. It's regular market traders who don't have their own business rights assessment. Then there's bed and breakfast properties which pay council tax rather than business rates. And then the last is council properties in receipt of charitable business rights relief, which would have otherwise got small business rights relief and been eligible for one of the earlier grants. So they're the ones that the government want us to prioritise. But as this is a discretionary scheme, then there is also that local discretion that we can apply to this scheme. So I'm speaking to the leader, I'm Councillor Ali. It's clear that Sandwell will want to help as many businesses as possible through this discretionary scheme. So therefore, we are really opening the application process up to any business that wants to be considered for a grant because they have actually lost income as a result of the pandemic. So businesses currently eligible for one of the initial grants will not be eligible for another grant through this scheme. It's just one grant per business. So amounts payable, well, the BES will actually give us a fixed amount of funding. So this is a cash limited scheme. Once we've spent all of this money on grants, we can't pay any more applications that would come through. So as I've said, Sandwell gets 3.362 million to provide discretionary grants. And the guidance is actually, it confirms that we can pay any amount of grant between £0 and £10,000 or 25,000. So we can't pay any amount between 10,001 and 24,999. There's nothing in between those. So it's 0 to 10 or 25. And it's for us to decide how much we should award a business. So the things that we need to take into account when making a decision are the circumstances of that business. What's the impact of the pandemic been on that business? What social value is that business bringing into the borough, such as employment and the wealth of the borough, as we've discussed previously. Now, it is cash limited, so the number of applications received may affect the amount that we're able to award each business. The payment's going to be made from the council's financial system in the same way that we make the payments for individual grants. So there's no change there to how we will pay. It will be paid by backs into the business's bank account. So the application process, there will be an online application form made available on our website. Businesses will be asked also to support their application with any evidence they can provide showing how their income has been affected, how they've lost income. So we'll look to see what the turnover was like previously compared to March and April and May when the pandemic struck. Because it's cash limited, we're recommending that we introduce an application window of just 4 weeks. There's a considerable amount of businesses that could come forward and apply for a discretionary grant. So it's good practice really to have that 4-week application window. If at the end of that period we haven't spent all the money, then we could always go again with a longer period if we felt that that was necessary. Publicity, what's really key with this, because there's a whole host of businesses out there that we are unaware of because they're not on our business rights system potentially. We need to publicise take-up of this as well as we can. So we'll certainly use the council's website, social media, and we'll work with all interested parties to try and achieve, you know, the best take-up as possible. We'll also put a copy of this policy on the website so that businesses can have a look and see if they would qualify. Grant applications received will be considered by a panel of council officers. We will definitely have some joint working across different teams because we first of all need to make sure they haven't had one of the existing grants, so Revs and Bens will have a role to play there. We will need to look at their business accounts, so there's going to be a role for finance to play with that element, and we also need to still do the Spotlight checks as we have with the previous grant. So Spotlight is a government tool that they provided us with to risk assess that business in terms of potential for fraud. So any applications received on a daily basis will be run through that system, and where businesses come out as rated red, then they will be held back for further checks before being passed for consideration for payment. In all cases, businesses will be written to, whether it's a successful claim or where we've refused, letters will be issued. We'll still seek, obviously, to make sure we pay these as accurately as possible, and we are able to recover any grants paid because of customers either providing fraudulent information or inaccurate information. We are able to recover any amounts. And that's sort of a very brief overview of the policy. So it is discretion, it's a discretionary policy, it shouldn't be too prescribed, but clearly there's some elements that the government want us to prioritise and they're detailed in the policy.
Thank you, Sue. Do we have questions?
Can I make a comment?
Of course.
I'm just really pleased that we are managing to get this other amount of monies out that is possible for other small businesses to apply to that have not been successful or not applied, or whatever reason they haven't had this other money, because there are an awful lot of small businesses out there that are going to be really struggling at this point, and any assistance obviously we can offer is all to the good. And I'd also like to say thank you from myself to the team for all the hard work that they're putting in.
Well done, Maria.
Thank you.
I mean, I would hope that we're involving the business ambassadors in some role. And you know, I think we perhaps should date applications and we deal with them on a first come, first served basis, because given that it's cash limited, we could be here forever trying to prioritise on the basis of all the applications, and I think we have to look at each one in its own merit on a date received basis, and when we've exhausted all the money, we need to go back to the government and ask, can we have some more? Because absolutely the business is surviving so that they can recover and help us all drive the economy forward in the future is really, really important. But I have to say I am grateful to the government making this pot available, but I would say it doesn't go anywhere near to meeting the need that we will see, and we would ask the government to be ready to allow us to spend every penny that we have in that pot and not have to repay any to the government whilst we've got businesses that are in need.
Yeah, Leader, and the Business, Energies and Industrial Strategy Department has actually said that if we realise that based on the applications we get, there isn't enough with that 5%, 3.36 million that we're going to receive, to contact them straight away. I haven't made any promises, but I have said to contact them.
That's promising, yeah, brilliant, brilliant. Thank you. Can I ask Alison Knight to provide an update on support for elderly and vulnerable residents, please?
Yep, thank you. This update follows on from the report that we brought to you on the 14th of April. and it is just an update really setting out what we've been doing with the shielded and elderly and vulnerable residents. So we've previously set out the definitions of shielded and the 3 strands of support that we are offering them, which is food, medicines and social contact. As I say, this report is to update on the work that we've been doing. So the way that we identify, just to remind Cabinet, the information that we have on shielded, we used the NHS shielded list, as well as identified our own vulnerable group through the various teams within the council: adult social care, revenues and benefits, neighbourhoods and communities. And we identified 23,227 people, which were 12,000 plus from the shielded group and just over 10,000 from the vulnerable group. So we've put in place a range of proactive measures. There have now been 2 separate letters that have been sent to every household, which are 135,400 households, advising them of emergency contact numbers and advice from government, as well as how they could get support through us. We then sent a further targeted letter to 28,000 households who had a person over 70 living at the address registered with the local GP. In addition, a 60-strong team proactively contacted over 18,000 of the shielding vulnerable group, with the remaining people to be contacted by mid-June. Where we haven't been able to get in touch via telephone, we've had a door knocking exercise undertaken to identify support with individuals. This has resulted in a number of support cases, so 678 people identified for essential supplies, further 165 for care and support, and over 1,000 people now getting support through the community and voluntary sector. What we're doing is we're also supporting people. We're trying to focus now on vulnerable, and where we can actually match people through a buddying service to help them sustain further supplies rather than come through our own services. And we're reviewing that in line with government guidance. We've been receiving further guidance throughout, as well as receiving details of a further 40 new residents daily. And some of the data we've been constantly looking at to make sure that it's consistent, but we have been revising our approach accordingly. In addition, the food hub that we set up, which I advised everyone about on the 14th of April, continues to operate with a number of staff from across different departments. In the report that I've submitted, we delivered 7,608 parcels to those by the 21st of May. That's now in excess of 8,200. Whilst we have seen some reduction in need from people needing food supplies, we have seen an increase in children and vulnerable families and those who normally receive free school meals. And we've also been providing additional food for those living in temporary accommodation. Furthermore, we've had a number of people contact us about the delivery of government parcels, which haven't always been getting through or have been left in communal areas. So we've been picking up some of those on the shielded list also. In addition, we've been providing food to the food banks in West Bromwich, Smethwick, Brushstrokes and Baking Bread, Wednesbury. The work with volunteers has increased, and I mentioned over 1,000 people are now receiving support, and this is via the Good Neighbours scheme, which provides support for residents in terms of things like ongoing practical support, picking up prescriptions, dog walking, etc. There's a befriending service, which is helping people to keep in touch by phone or FaceTime. And in addition, we have the community offer with our local organisations, where people are then signposted to if they need further support. And as of the 18th of May, 673 people were being supported via this route. So the ongoing risks are, and I'll highlight the new ones really, that the data from MHCLG continues to be inconsistent and needs further validation, which is something that we're doing with the teams to make sure that we are actually getting to everybody that we need to. However, there is always, and I highlighted this in the last report, there is always the risk that even though we are contacting via telephone, via letter, via face-to-face door knocking, there is always the risk that somebody may not be contacted and that we may have missed somebody. But we're minimising that risk where we can. There's clearly with our reset and recovery plan, we need to take into account those members of staff who may be remobilised, who may not be able to support in the way that we have with the telephones and also the food hubs. So this is something that we will take into account. And there's the continued expenditure, obviously, with the food bank that I've highlighted. With next steps, we need to now continue to review the support that's ongoing, whether we continue this throughout the summer, given what was said earlier about there being a potential second spike, and also to review whether leisure centres will be opening eventually, and clearly we'll be waiting for government guidance on that. And we're continuing to monitor the number of referrals going into the Good Neighbours and Community Office scheme. So I think they're the key things. I hope that was sufficient. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Do we have any questions? No. And I think it's right to pass on, Alison, that I have had an enormous amount of compliments and really heartwarming letters and emails about the work that the team has been doing and how much people really, really appreciate at this time of need that there is somewhere to turn to. I think there is massive confusion with the government's parcels that are being dropped off in lobbies that do seem to contain the most ridiculous ingredients, such as banana blancmange, that people aren't able to differentiate which is the council and which is the government. And I would seek to inform all the people of Sandwell, if it's got banana blancmange in it, hasn't come from the council. And the council is trying to make sure that its parcels are meaningful in terms of people's normal diets and their preferences as much as we are able. But I do think we need to move towards a normalisation process whereby once people have received a parcel and the emergency has been dealt with, I don't think it's sensible for people to be coming round time and again. And I would ask the team to look at ways that we can support people if the delivery of the parcel and the joining up with the support in the community is not working. So perhaps we could have a future report on that aspect, because I'm not sure it is sustainable for us to continue in this vein throughout the summer. I think we have to be able to assist people to assist themselves with assistance from elsewhere, and the council has to start to look at how it can return to delivering mainstream services. And I hesitate to mention grass cutting, but lots of people are saying, why isn't the council doing business as usual? And this is exactly why, and we need solutions so that we can move through it. But my thanks to all the team. Everybody's done a fantastic job. Really heartwarming stuff. Any comments from anyone else?
I would like to add to that, Leader, if you don't mind, because I think they've done a phenomenal job servicing our vulnerable residents that have got no one else to look after them, and all credit to them. I'll take my hat off to them. I think they've been doing a marvellous job.
Thank
I'd like to.
Yeah, and just a quick one for all the staff who are also volunteering and helping out the food bank. So I've been there a few times, and Spoken to them, and they're really pleased, really energized about it. Quite enjoy the activity and the guidance being followed, and also the companies who are helping us to deliver the food parcels.
Absolutely,
really good work, and just goes to show how well Sandwell works together.
Can I also say, if you can ring the number, the 2266, and you get another number to ring, and you ring that within 15 minutes to get a food parcel to somebody who's absolutely desperate, it's absolutely amazing.
thank you, Councillor. Okay, so really great work, and what I want to do, Alison, is build on. We have got an extraordinary amount of goodwill and community spirit, and I don't want us to lose that. I want us to build on it, and I want us to have communities that come together and work together and play together in the future, and we all see that we are all inextricably linked to all of our neighbours. So I think it's been a really heartwarming time, and I want to bring that with us into the recovery. But thank you so much for the work you've done.
Thank you.
Can I now ask Nicola Plant to provide an update on PPE, please?
Thank you, Leader. COVID-19 generated a large demand on the PPE supply chain, and this report provides an overview of the PPE supply management by the Council. The government supply route was established to assist emergency requirements, and this is operated by the local resilience forums. The supply is aimed at two broad categories: social care and primary care. Local authorities are required to manage the PPE needs for social care. Originally, 90% of this government supply was provided for social care, with 10% allocated to primary care. This has recently changed, and from the beginning of May, the allocations changed to 75% to social care and 25% to primary care. And this was reflected by the increase in activity in primary care. We have based our management of PPE supplies on a three-strand approach. We have guidance, where we provide advice and guidance to ensure that staff and providers are clear on who needs PPE, and also ensures that workers on the front line are safe, but ensures that we're only using it when it is clinically necessary and therefore not wasted. We then have distribution, which involved establishing a PPE store from which we can distribute PPE to where it's needed. And then thirdly, future supply, which is forecasting future demands and working with procurement, the local resilience forum and neighbouring authorities to develop future supply chains. The majority of these supplies have been distributed to the adult social care sector, both internal and external providers, and some provision has also been distributed to funeral directors, children's social care and school services to meet urgent need. The national benchmark for PPE supplies is to have sufficient supplies to meet 7 days usage. Currently, based on average and forecast uses, the supplies in the council exceed this benchmark, and therefore we consider that we can currently have sufficient supplies of PPE to meet our needs. Systems are in place to monitor and manage the fluctuating demand on stock levels, which can be affected by a number of issues such as levels of transmission and changes in guidance in the usage of PPE. But over the recent weeks, we have established a strong supply chain. PPE will continue to be an issue over the coming weeks and as easement progresses, and we are aware that that might bring further demands on the supply chain. However, the council will continue to monitor this and do whatever we can to ensure that sufficient supply is available to meet our demands. Thank you.
Thank you. Do we have questions, contributions? No. Can I just reiterate, Nicola, we do not have a current shortage of PPE. That's right. And we are planning to ensure that we don't have one in the future.
That's correct.
Thank you. Councillor Hadley? No? Thank you. Okay, we will move then to Stuart Lackaby, who will provide an update on Adult Social Care Infection Fund Ring Fenced Grant 2020.
Thank you, Leader. So this report provides a summary of the Adult Social Care Infection Fund ring-fence grant and requests Emergency Committee provide approval for the Director of Adult Social Care in conjunction with the Director of Public Health to administer the Adult Social Care ring-fence grant in line with government guidance as set out in this report. In Sandwell, we have 86 care homes that provide 2,223 beds. We also have 72 contracted domiciliary care providers who work with around 3,000 people. As Lisa mentioned earlier, the council and its partners have provided considerable support to care homes to help reduce coronavirus infections, manage outbreaks and maintain sustainability. Despite this, there's been considerable media attention in recent weeks about the impact of coronavirus in UK care homes. On the 14th of May, the government introduced the Adult Social Care Infection Fund, and last Friday on the 22nd of May, they provided a local government circular which outlined how the fund would be spent. The fund has a value of 600 million nationally, which equates to 2.8 million for Sandwell. The primary purpose of this fund is to support adult social care providers, including those with whom the local authority do not contract, to reduce the coronavirus transmission. The guidance is really clear in relation to how this money is spent. It requires the local authority to passport 75% of the funding to those local care homes based on a calculation on the number of beds the care homes provide. The remaining 25% of the fund can be used to support the wider workforce in relation to domiciliary care or other adult social care activity. Now, the government's provided this allocation in this fund, but is really clear on what it needs to be spent on. Organisations can only spend it on infection control measures that look to reduce transmission of the infection. So they include things like ensuring that care workers are not working across multiple care homes, ensuring that when care workers are self-isolated, they're paid their actual salary, not just moving straight to statutory sick pay, ensuring that alternate accommodation is provided to care workers where they ask for that, so that they're not being infected because of family members who might be picking up the infection. So the government is asking us to distribute this money. It's asking us to get assurance from providers that this money will only be spent on those infection control measures. Providers actually have to provide us with that assurance, and in the event that they don't spend the money on those infection control measures, the guidance suggests that we would be looking to recoup this money. So in summary, this provides a significant chunk of money to our local independent sector providers as well as ourselves to support us to deal with infections within our care and wider adult social care provision. So this report suggests that, as in line with the guidance, we passport the 75% of the fund to the care homes, with really clear indication to the care homes as to the requirements of the fund, and that we passport the remaining 25% to the domiciliary care providers who are contracted with the council or delivering direct payments on behalf of the council based on the number of hours each domiciliary care provider is delivering for us. So the recommendation of this report is Emergency Committee approve myself as the Director of Adult Social Care, in conjunction with Lisa McNally as the Director of Public Health, to administer the Adult Social Care Infection Fund ring funds as defined in this report and absolutely in line with government guidance. Thank you.
Thank you, Stuart. Do we have any questions or issues? No. Again, I would want to say it is really good that we have funding from the government to ensure that our care homes can survive this crisis, because it is really important we have a good quality market when we come out of this for the future. We are dependent as a council on the homes being of a good quality and surviving this crisis. So the funding is absolutely welcomed, even though perhaps it might cause some disagreements as to how the money has been spent, I'm sure, in the future. So the recommendations, can I remind people, are to endorse the framework for reset and recovery as outlined in the report, to support the approach to restarting services as soon as it is safe to do so, and appropriate health and safety measures have been put in place, to approve the discretionary business grants policy as set out in Appendix 2A, and to give approval for the Director of Adult Social Care in conjunction with the Director of Public Health to administer the Adult Social Care Infection Fund ring-fenced grant in line with the government guidance as set out in Appendix number 5. Moving to the vote, I'll ask the Chief Executive to call on each member to indicate whether they are for, against, or wish to abstain on the recommendation. When the Chief Executive has called out your name, would you please say for, against, or abstain? Chief Executive.
Thank you. Councillor Davis.
For.
Councillor Alley.
For.
Councillor Crompton.
For.
Councillor Hadley.
For.
Councillor Millard.
For.
Councillor Shaheen.
For.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Everyone is in favour and the recommendations are all approved. Can I ask now for the Executive Director of Children's Services to present the report on the phased reopening of Sandwell schools, please?
Thank you, Leader. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Great, thank you. So the paper that you've got in front of you was written just over a week ago, and a number of things have changed since that time. So as I work through the report, I'll update the committee on those changes as we go. Just as an introduction though, this has been a really challenging time for our schools, and it's really important that the council stands right beside them during this process. There's been a constant stream of guidance issued from the DfE, usually around 9 or 10 o'clock at night. Some of that guidance differs from the Public Health England guidance. There have been conflicting reports from the official SAGE group and the independent SAGE group. And since writing this paper, there have been 3 more sets of guidance documents published by the DfE, again with changed information. And the secondary information in particular recommends putting back wider opening to the 15th of June for secondary schools. So the council's been working closely with all Sandwell schools, sending daily communications, having regular meetings to try and find out a local way through that national guidance and to reach some consensus across the borough to think about safely opening to a wider group of children. And Chris Ward and his team, you know, receiving that guidance sort of around 9 or 10 o'clock at night every night, and then interpreting it and sending it back out to schools the next morning, have been working really hard. And I've had lots of messages from schools thanking Sandwell for its outstanding response and its partnership with schools. And then in addition to that, Lisa McNally has also spent a lot of time talking to head teachers over the last few days about their individual staff circumstances and risk assessments. So turning to the paper, in section 2, the paper sets out the way in which our schools originally opened to key worker children and vulnerable children. And our attendance figures have been fairly similar to the national picture. And it also describes in this section the additional support that schools and the council have provided to families to support their children's learning at home and also play at home. And at 2.5, you can see the reference that I made to our regular contact with schools and also with trades unions during this period. So continuing to open schools to key worker children and vulnerable children will continue to be really important, and I know that our schools are committed to this. But in section 3, I just move on to describing the announcement made by the Prime Minister on the 10th of May about wider opening to more children. And section 3 describes the activities that have taken place since that date. Now in Sandwell, there was a consensus amongst our schools that it would not be appropriate to strictly follow the DFE guidance. So the arrangements that are set out at paragraph 3 were adopted at the meeting of head teachers with the council, the joint executive group. And the major difference between what's set out at 3.5 and the national guidance is that fewer children would be in school and in class groups than in the national guidance. A part-time attendance option has been put in place, and the order in which different year groups might return to school is different as well. And this is due to local circumstances and arrived at through conversations with our schools locally. In paragraph 3.7, I described some of the information and the tools that the council's provided to schools to support their decision making about wider opening. Now, since that date, the date that this was written, this paper, the council's provided some further guidance to schools, specific public health guidance about wider opening, and that now includes individual conversations with schools about their specific circumstances, as I mentioned, the calls that Lisa's having with schools. So all of this activity has been really important to ensure that schools have got their plans ready to implement on the 1st of June or defer as appropriate. And those final decisions will be made by schools impacted by their own particular circumstances, such as their staffing arrangements or their school split space, their individual risk assessments. Now, those risk assessments at this time might be further impacted by the fact that the National Test Track and Trace systems are up and running, by the fact that, as Lisa described earlier, that there's a slight upsurge in coronavirus in Sandwell. And we're meeting with head teachers again tomorrow, and we'll be discussing those matters with them again. So moving through the paper, I'm sorry, the numbering in this paper seems to have gone a bit awry, but section 5, the consultation part of the report, highlights the other important partner in this conversation, which is parents. And at the end of the day, parents will decide whether or not to send their children to school. And in a letter that the council drafted and schools sent out to parents, it was made very clear that it's not possible to guarantee the safety of these arrangements. It is possible to assure parents that really robust risk assessments have been put in place, but it's not a guarantee, and parents will need to make their own decisions. So in section 6, you'll see that it's up to schools to make the final decision about whether or not to extend their opening to more pupils. And today the council received a copy of the legal advice that's been provided to the LGA by Peter Oldham QC, which confirms that the question of when and how to open or close school premises is a matter for the governing body to decide. However, as I said at the beginning of this presentation, it's so important for the council to stand alongside its schools in recognising that these decisions can't be made lightly, that the national evidence and guidance is confused and it's contradictory. And the government has said that it needs to demonstrate that the 5 national tests have been met before schools should extend their opening. And that update is due from the Prime Minister tomorrow, the 28th of May. So to go to the recommendations, the committee's asked to note the progress to date and the ongoing activities and obviously ask any questions and make any comments. But this is still a moving picture for most of our schools. I think that our schools are feeling confident that they have good plans in place, but they're nervous about final decision making, and the announcement by the Prime Minister tomorrow, the expected announcement, will have some impact on any final decision making, along with local concerns that may have arisen over the last few days. Thank you, Leader. Happy for any questions, and Chris Ward is on the call as well.
Okay, do we have questions or comments? No. I mean, I think it is really, really important for parents to know that the decision has to be made by them as to what's in the best interest of their child. They know the family circumstances. They know the risks that there may be. And I would want to assure all parents in Sandwell that we absolutely respect the decision that you make in relation to your child. And I think even the government understands that this will take some time for people to return to confidence that their children will not be bringing home the virus if they've got people in their family who need to be isolated or shielded. So there will be no fines. Parents need to be assured that we absolutely respect the decision is theirs to make for their children as to when it's in their best interest. We also want the schools to know that we are absolutely on their side and we are helping with the risk assessments, and I know our Director of Public Health has been really active in helping schools understand how they can minimise the risk, because we need the teachers to stay safe and we need the staff at the schools to stay safe. So we've got a number of pieces of the jigsaw to put in place, I think, but as and when we can, Sandwell is happy for the governing bodies to make the decision as to whether the school's open and for parents to make the decision as to when their children return. Okay, so can we note the report, please?
Yeah.
Thank you. So can I ask the Director of Law and Governance and Monitoring Officer to present the programme of committee meetings for 2020, please?
Thank you, Chair. This is a short report seeking approval from the committee with regards to the Council's calendar of meetings up to September of this year. So at Appendix A is a schedule of planned committee meetings and Cabinet meetings. The programme sets out specifically the arrangements for Cabinet, the scrutiny boards, licensing and planning committees, with other remaining committees to then be brought online thereafter. Focus is specifically in relation to these committees so that we can embed all the necessary remote committee arrangements with all other members, and that will continue in the next few weeks. And as each committee is rolled out, we will ensure that the necessary arrangements with members are embedded. So approval is sought from the committee for those changes, and the calendar meetings are set out Appendix 1 to be approved. We will keep the arrangements under review. One issue that we are exploring is in relation to the voting arrangements. There is new technological arrangements in place that have come out which enables electronic voting to take place, and we are exploring that with ICT colleagues so that we can hopefully roll that out in the coming weeks. A further update report will be presented in the coming weeks with regards to the remainder of the municipal year, and we'll present a further report to the Emergency Committee at that point. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Can I ask, are there any issues or questions that members would like to raise? No. So moving to the vote, I'll ask the Chief Executive call on each member to indicate whether they are for, against or wish to abstain on the recommendations. When the Chief Executive has called out your name, could you please say for, against or abstain? Chief Executive.
Councillor Davies.
For.
Councillor Crumpton.
For.
Councillor Ali.
For.
Councillor Hadley.
For.
Councillor Millard.
For.
Councillor Shaheen.
For.
Thank you.
Thank you. Everyone is in favour and the recommendation is approved. There have been no delegated decisions taken since the last meeting of this committee, so I intend to close the meeting. Can I just thank everybody for participating and the hard work that's gone on behind the scenes. Thank you very much. Take care, everyone. Stay safe.
Thank you.